This month, China's President Xi Jinping made his first trip to Europe in 5 years. First stop, Paris. And with no shortage of issues to discuss, such as China's human rights violations, France's national broadcaster, BFM TV, found enough time to discuss some of the minutiae. Take a listen.
Ce qui va être intéressant de savoir si Madame Preng Liyuan, la femme de Xi Jinping, sera habillée dans une jolie robe Louis Vuitton ou Gucci ou totalement en robe chinoise. Là, c'est intéressant la voiture parce que c'est ce qu'on appelle une drapeau rouge et c'est la nouvelle version que les Chinois ont remis à jour puisqu'ils avaient arrêté la production en 1981.
That evening, a lavish state dinner with film stars, business tycoons, and former ministers under the hashtag Shiplomacy. State media published online this snazzy video of other highlights from day one in Paris, meeting his French counterpart and host Emmanuel Macron and head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Day two saw Xi and Macron travel to the Pyrenees Mountains. Here's Xinhua's news from the tarmac.
President Macron is leading his esteemed guest to a very special place that is close to his heart. When a friend is dear to you, you take them home. So today is without doubt a very special occasion for our bilateral relations.
And Xi, the reporter, wasn't the only one gushing. Macron hoped that Xi, the president, would as well. He invited him and his wife to a spot in the Pyrenees where, as a child, he spent time visiting his grandmother. After watching traditional dancers perform, the two presidential couples wined and dined. Reuters said Macron tried to charm Xi with lamb. CNN reporting that the Chinese president may be a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Well, Michael, Xi Jinping is on a charm offensive. But analysts say that this visit is about much more than that. This is part of China's strategy to exploit differences inside the EU.
And after France, Xi visited Serbia and Hungary. Let's speak now to our guest about Xi's high-stakes visit to Europe. On the line from Ho Chi Minh City, Eric Olander, the editor-in-chief of the China Global South Project. Hello to you again, Eric. Also joining us from Brussels is a senior Europe correspondent for the South China Morning Post, Finbarr, Bermingham. Finbarr, let's start with you. The French media fascinated by Xi's visit, and sometimes the rolling news channels here are accused of perhaps going too big or running out of things to say. What did you make of their coverage?
I noticed this in the print press as well, William. There did seem to be a level of captivation with the sort of choreography of the event, the palace intrigue, or what gifts did Xi and Macron exchange? What was on the menu? And it's something actually that the Chinese media were also very carried away with. I wouldn't compare the two necessarily, but on both sides, they both seem to be focused very heavily on like the menu and, as we say, the presents and the gifts, without maybe delving as much as you might expect into the substance of what was said. I guess it was unusual to see Xi Jinping in Europe. The first time in 5 years. He hasn't been here since 2019, so perhaps it's understandable. The thing that people were curious as to how things would unfold logistically. But yeah, I noticed that also. I thought it was quite curious.
Eric, we did hear some rights groups and political opponents railing against the sort of red carpet welcome that she received at the Élysée Palace, raising questions about the rights of Uyghur Muslims, about Tibetans, also the fate of Hong Kongers. Did you think the French press did enough to hold Macron accountable?
As much as they probably could do under the circumstances. I mean, these topics now have been pushed much lower in the priority list than they were even just a few years ago. Xinjiang, Uyghurs, Tibet, Hong Kong, much more prominent 2-3 years ago. Today, it's much more about trade, overcapacity, obviously the war in Ukraine, Russia. So these other issues took a lot more priority over human rights issues. And the Chinese went into this expecting it. Clearly, none of those more contentious, controversial issues ever made it into the Chinese coverage of this. So they, as Finbarr pointed out, wanted to talk about the ceremony, the pageantry. They loved all the pictures of the visits at Élysée and all of that. And it gives legitimacy to Xi that he looks to, as CNN pointed out, try and kind of sow divisions within the Western and European coalition, and to really demonstrate to the United States that they're increasingly isolated, that Xi does have friends in places where the United States likes to call home in that respect. And so I think in that respect, I think Xi went home this week feeling very good about what happened in Europe this week.
Now, Eric, staying on that point, when Macron, quote unquote, tried to seduce Xi not really known for his sentimentality. How do you think he interpreted these grand gestures from the French president?
It goes a long way. He's in many ways like Trump. He likes these gestures. He likes the pageantry. He likes the ceremony. And remember that Macron and Xi back, last year had I think it was the last time that Macron was in China, had something short of a love fest. I mean, and so these two get along quite well. Macron was, I think, very diplomatic and not prioritizing the sensitive human rights issues that Xi doesn't want to talk about. Not sure how strongly he brought them up, but I think Macron has much bigger priorities, namely the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, Finbarr, as Eric mentioned, she comes out of this looking pretty well, being courted by Europe to try to solve some of these geopolitical issues. Macron, for his part, there were disputes about cognac, about the war in Ukraine. Did he get anything that he wanted?
I don't think he got any firm commitments on any of the big stuff. He said that he had a commitment from Xi Jinping not to provide arms directly to Russia and to clamp down on dual-use goods. But he said that last year after he went to Beijing. The proof will be in the pudding. I mean, they notice in Europe that the intensity of this dual-use trade is increasing between China and Russia. On trade, I mean, it's not really known whether there were any concessions. We don't think so. I mean, Macron intimated that Xi had made some sort of commitment not to put provisional duties on French cognac, but we haven't seen anything official on that. So I'd be surprised. I would agree with Eric 100%. The French leg of this trip was the only one that posed any risk to Xi Jinping. He was going to be toasted in Serbia and Hungary. He's come out of it looking pretty safe.
Right, and those other legs of the trip in Serbia and Hungary, was he welcomed as warmly? Did they throw out as many honors towards the Chinese president as a country that's seen sometimes as antagonistic towards China?
Absolutely. The Serbs and the Hungarians, they really went to town. I mean, in Serbia, he had 20,000 people in the square as he gave a speech. There was some reporting saying that the Serbian government had told civil servants to take the day off so that they could attend this ceremony. And in Budapest, this is, within the EU and NATO, this is China's best friend. And Viktor Orban he spared no expense rolling out the red carpet. And, if you read the coverage in the Chinese press and the Chinese official readouts, they would say that they've been rewarded accordingly. This was the big message, is if you are our friend, this is what you get. In Serbia, there was 30-something deals signed. In Hungary, there was 18. Big ticket stuff like high-speed rail, nuclear cooperation, which is huge for China in Europe. The pageantry will, in the Chinese eyes, have been rewarded,
Yeah, Eric, this is part of what China calls it. It's wanting this multipolar world. France says it wants Europe to have a strategic autonomy. On paper, these two visions may sound like they could be compatible. Is that how you think it would play out in practice?
No, not at all. I mean, there is no consensus in Europe on China. I mean, we just saw Olaf Scholz in China, recently. His take is different than Macron's, is different than certainly what's going on in the UK. And when we look at Hungary and Serbia, totally different. While we're talking about overcapacity of cars and the fear of Chinese imported vehicles into Europe, Hungary is talking about building a BYD factory. So two totally different narratives that are going on in Europe. And I think Xi and the Chinese rightly want to kind of try and split this coalition so that a consensus doesn't form. I mean, when you look at Hungary, it makes for some incredibly strange bedfellows. I mean, the far right in the United States that loves Viktor Orban is, in love with a man who also loves Xi Jinping, who the far right in the United States hates. And so the complex relationships that Viktor Orban's at the center of really make for some very interesting reading.
Yeah, stay on that note, Eric. If Donald Trump returns to the White House, is Xi Jinping happy or upset?
I come from the school of thought, and I think most Chinese scholars are on this, that they want Trump back. The chaos that Trump brings is beneficial to China. What the Chinese hate more than anything is what Biden's done with the coalitions, with AUKUS, with the Squad, with the Quad, with all of these alliances that he's tightened up. The Japan-South Korea partnership is much tighter today than it was under Trump. That's what the Chinese don't like. They like the divisions. They like the chaos that Trump brings. Yeah,
Finbarr, this seems to speak to the idea that the West doesn't know how to view China, an economic competitor, an economic partner, or a challenger to the established world order.
Yeah, and I mean, officially they view it as all three, and sometimes that can be messy. I mean, my view is that across Europe, people can really take the EU policy of partner, competitor, rival, and write on that exactly what you want. Everybody, somebody's idea of de-risking is totally different to others, and as Eric said, I mean, the German and the French, the two biggest powers in Europe, are kind of pulling in opposite directions. The French really love the stronger trade actions that Brussels is taking. The Germans really don't like it at all. There's no unity, despite what the policymakers and the presidents in Brussels like to say.
Yeah, no unity. Eric, running out of time, one final thought. If China can't win over Europe, he has a head start, at least in the global south. That's your area, right?
He absolutely does. And it just goes to show that the U.S.-led international order isn't as strong as the U.S. thinks it is. And that's what this message is intended to convey to countries here in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East and elsewhere, that there is room for China to be a major player.
All right. I want to thank our guests, Finbarr Bermingham from the South China Morning Post, joining us on the line from Brussels, as well, an old colleague, Eric Olander of the China Global South Project. Nice to see your face again, Eric. Gentlemen, thank you for speaking to Scoop this Friday.
It's a lot.
Thanks so much.
Well, Xi's visit to Paris marked the 60th anniversary of French-China diplomatic relations. Our quote of the week comes from the 50th anniversary, and it's a quote within a quote. While visiting Paris 10 years ago, Xi Jinping said that Napoleon Bonaparte once said that China is a sleeping lion, and when it wakes up, the world will shake. That is it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.